My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 34 years old, and the night my parents handed my sister the restaurant I'd spent 15 years building, they gave me a cookbook. Not a joke, not a symbolic gift. An actual cookbook, leather cover, gold lettering. My mother's handwritten note inside the first page read, "For the daughter who always loved cooking." The room erupted in applause. Everyone smiled. Everyone except me. Because every person in that dining room believed my sister had built the restaurant standing around us. None of them knew I had created every recipe, designed every menu, trained every chef, worked every holiday, missed birthdays, missed relationships, missed my entire 20s, and in less than 30 seconds, my parents erased me from the story they'd forced me to write. I should have walked away. Looking back, that would have been the smartest thing I'd ever done. Instead, I stayed long enough to watch them destroy themselves, but to understand why that cookbook became the most expensive gift anyone has ever given me. You need to know what happened 15 years earlier. Not through childhood memories, not through old family stories, through work, because that's where they stole everything from me. I was 19 when my father first showed me the empty building. The place smelled like dust, old wood, and broken plumbing. Most people would have seen another abandoned property. I saw possibility. "What do you think?" my father asked. I walked slowly through the kitchen. The ovens barely worked. The floors needed replacing. The ceiling leaked. But I could already imagine where every station would go, where customers would sit, what dishes would come out of that kitchen. I smiled. It could become something incredible. My father wrapped one arm around my shoulders. "I knew you'd understand." That sentence stayed with me for years, because it made me believe we were building something together. I had just finished culinary school. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. I only had talent, and the desperate hope that one day I'd own a restaurant worthy of my name. My parents couldn't afford to pay me. At least, that's what they told me. "If we survive these first few years," Dad said, "this place will belong to the family." Family. That word became the chain I willingly wrapped around my own neck. So I worked. Every morning before sunrise. Every weekend. Every holiday. When the dishwasher quit, I washed dishes. When cooks called in sick, I cooked. When suppliers canceled, I drove across town buying ingredients myself. If customers complained, I fixed everything. Slowly, the restaurant began attracting attention. Food bloggers loved the menu. Local magazines praised the originality. Customers waited over an hour for tables. Every compliment landed on my father's shoulders. He always accepted interviews alone. "It has always been my vision," he'd say. I never corrected him. I thought family shared victories. That illusion lasted longer than it should have. Victoria joined the business 4 years later. She'd never worked inside a professional kitchen. Couldn't fillet a fish. Couldn't make fresh pasta. Couldn't survive one Friday dinner rush. But she had something my parents valued far more than competence. She made them look successful. Beautiful clothes. Perfect smile. A degree in business she'd barely finished. She immediately became the face of the restaurant. "Customers like seeing her," Mom explained. "They connect with elegance." I kept wearing my stained chef coat, working 16-hour shifts, burning my hands on hot pans while Victoria smiled for magazine photos beside food she'd never cooked. Whenever journalists asked who created the menu, Dad answered before anyone else could. "Our family works as one." I noticed something strange. Every interview removed my name a little more. Every article mentioned Victoria more often. Every celebration happened in the dining room. Every sacrifice happened inside the kitchen. Still, I stayed, because I believed ownership wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned. I had no idea my parents had already decided who would receive it. Years passed. The restaurant became one of the busiest in the city. Reservations were impossible on weekends. Private events booked months ahead. Investors started calling. Franchise offers appeared. Dad laughed every time. "We're keeping this in the family." Again, that word, family. Whenever I asked about becoming a partner, Dad smiled. "Everything comes at the right time." Whenever I asked about paperwork, Mom changed the subject. You worry too much. Whenever I asked about ownership, Victoria interrupted. We all know Olivia doesn't care about titles. Then she'd laugh. Everyone else laughed too, including my parents. I forced myself to laugh with them, because admitting how much those comments hurt would have meant admitting something far worse. That maybe they had never intended to keep their promise. One afternoon, an older gentleman sat alone near the kitchen pass. He came almost every Thursday. Always ordered the chef's tasting menu. Never complained. Never asked for special treatment. After service ended, he asked if he could meet the chef. Dad started walking toward the dining room. The man shook his head. Not you. He pointed directly at me. You. Dad hesitated, then forced a smile. I joined the man at his table. My name is Harold Bennett, he said. I owned restaurants for 40 years. I recognized the name immediately. Every young chef in the state knew who Harold Bennett was. His restaurants had won awards long before I entered culinary school. I've been watching this place for months, he continued. Then he asked a question no one had ever asked me. How much of this restaurant actually belongs to you? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out, because for the first time in 15 years, I realized I didn't know the answer. Harold studied my expression for a few seconds, then nodded slowly, almost as if I'd confirmed something he already suspected. Before leaving, he placed his business card on the table. If you ever discover that you've been building someone else's dream, he stood. Call me before it's too late. I slipped the card into my apron without another word. At the time, I thought he was being overly dramatic. 3 weeks later, my parents invited everyone to a special family celebration at the restaurant. Dad said it was finally time to recognize everything we built together. I had waited 15 years to hear those words. I never imagined they would become the beginning of the worst night of my life. The celebration filled the restaurant long before sunset. Every table was occupied. Investors, local reporters, suppliers, friends of my parents, regular customers who had supported us for years. Champagne flowed through the dining room. A jazz trio played near the entrance. Everyone kept congratulating my father. You built something extraordinary. We can't wait to see what's next. Dad accepted every compliment with practiced humility. None of this would have been possible without my family. Every time he said those words, he looked toward Victoria, never toward me. I ignored it. I kept telling myself the real announcement hadn't happened yet. Maybe tonight he would finally introduce me as executive chef or even partner. Maybe all those years had finally meant something. Then Mom tapped a spoon against her wine glass. The entire room fell silent. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, she said with a smile that looked almost rehearsed. This restaurant has been our family's greatest achievement. She reached for Dad's hand. And now, it's time for the next generation. People applauded before they even knew what she meant. Dad nodded toward Victoria. Come here, sweetheart. Victoria stood, wearing a white designer suit that probably cost more than my first-year salary. She hugged both of them while cameras flashed around the room. I smiled. I actually smiled, because I still believed they were about to recognize both of us. Dad lifted a thick leather folder. 4 years, he announced. We've been preparing for this moment. My heartbeat accelerated. This restaurant deserves someone with vision, someone capable of leading it into the future. He handed the folder to Victoria. She opened it, then looked at him with fake surprise. No! Dad laughed. Yes, it's officially yours. The room exploded with applause. My ears started ringing. Someone beside me whispered. I knew she'd inherit it. Another voice answered. She's always been the obvious choice. I couldn't move. Victoria held the property deed high enough for every camera to capture. Owner, sole managing partner, Victoria Carter. Not one line mentioned me. Not one. 15 years. Gone. Just like that. My father finally looked in my direction. For one impossible second, I thought he had made a mistake, that there had to be another folder, another announcement, another document waiting for me. Instead, Mom walked toward me, carrying a small gift box wrapped with a gold ribbon. Everyone watched. She smiled warmly. We couldn't forget you, sweetheart. My hands trembled as I accepted it. Open it, Victoria said loudly, so everyone can see. The room laughed softly. I slowly untied the ribbon, lifted the lid. Inside rested an old leather cookbook. Not expensive, not antique, just old. I opened the cover. The first page contained Mom's handwriting. To Olivia, because every great cook deserves new recipes. The silence lasted less than a second. Then someone laughed. Another person joined. Then another. A supplier leaned toward my father. That's adorable. Victoria covered her mouth, pretending to be emotional. It's perfect for her. My father nodded proudly. She always preferred the kitchen anyway. The kitchen. Not ownership. Not leadership. Not recognition. Just the kitchen. I looked around the room. People weren't laughing because they hated me. They laughed because they honestly believed the gift fit me perfectly. My parents had rewritten history so completely that even our closest friends believed I had simply been one of the cooks. Then came the sentence that hurt more than everything else combined. A reporter raised his hand. Victoria, when did you start developing the menu? She didn't hesitate. Oh, it's been a family effort. She looked directly at me. But I've always been the creative one. Creative? For a second, I genuinely wondered if I'd imagined the last 15 years. The 18-hour shifts, the burns covering my arms, the notebooks filled with recipes, the nights sleeping on flour sacks because we couldn't afford another employee. Had none of that existed? Or had they simply erased it? The reporter smiled. I'd love to feature your creative process. Victoria nodded confidently. I'd be honored. She accepted praise for dishes she couldn't even pronounce correctly. And no one questioned it. Not even my parents. Especially not my parents. Dinner began. Customers toasted. Investors celebrated. People lined up to congratulate Victoria. Not one person approached me, until Harold quietly sat beside me. He hadn't applauded. He hadn't smiled. He simply looked toward the dining room. They buried you alive, he said. His voice remained calm, almost detached. I couldn't answer. I was afraid that if I spoke, I'd cry. They didn't just steal a restaurant. He looked at the cookbook still resting in my hands. They stole authorship. That word hit harder than the deed. Authorship. My recipes. My techniques. My ideas. My life. Harold leaned back. Tell me something. Can your sister cook? I almost laughed. No. Can your father? No. Your mother? I shook my head again. He nodded once. Then this building has a very expensive problem. I frowned. What problem? They own the restaurant. He looked directly into my eyes. But they don't own the person who made people come back. For the first time that night, I felt something besides humiliation. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was curiosity. Before I could answer, Victoria climbed onto the small stage again. I almost forgot. Everyone looked toward her. We have one more surprise. She smiled at me. That smile immediately made my stomach tighten. I think everyone deserves to meet the team behind our future. She snapped her fingers. The kitchen staff walked into the dining room. Every cook, every dishwasher, every server. I stood with them. Victoria pointed at us one by one. Our amazing employees. She had just introduced me to hundreds of people, as if I were nothing more than another member of the staff. Not the chef, not the creator, not the woman who had built the restaurant beside my father since she was 19. Just an employee. The applause echoed through the dining room once again. And as I looked across the crowd, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Several investors were already walking toward Victoria, asking about expanding the brand. They were preparing to build more restaurants, using my work, without me. And in that exact moment, I made the first decision that would eventually destroy everything my parents thought they owned. I didn't leave immediately. That surprised even me. A younger version of myself would have stayed until the last guest left, cleaned the kitchen, thanked everyone for coming, and convinced herself tomorrow would somehow be different. That woman disappeared the moment Victoria introduced me as an employee. I quietly placed the cookbook back inside its box. Then I walked into the kitchen. Nobody noticed. Nobody stopped me. For 15 years, that room had been my entire world. Every scar on my hands had been earned there. Every recipe on the menu had started on that stainless steel prep table. Every successful dinner service carried a piece of me. And somehow, I had become invisible inside the very place I created. I opened the walk-in refrigerator one last time. Labels, prep containers, sauces, stocks. Everything was exactly where I had designed it to be. The system worked because I had built it, not because my father understood kitchens, not because Victoria knew anything about food, because every inch of that restaurant carried habits I'd spent years creating. One of the line cooks, Ethan, walked in holding 2 trays of vegetables. He froze. "You okay, chef?" "Chef." It was the first time anyone had called me that all night. I forced a smile. "I'm fine." He didn't believe me. Neither did the others. Within minutes, 3 cooks and 2 servers quietly gathered near the prep station. Nobody said much. They had all seen the announcement. They had all heard the applause. Finally, one of the pastry chefs broke the silence. "I thought they were making you partner." "So did I." No one spoke again. The silence hurt more than sympathy. Because they knew. They had watched me carry this restaurant on my shoulders for years. One dishwasher, who had been with us almost a decade, looked down before asking, "So, who teaches her?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Victoria." He scratched the back of his neck. "She told us tomorrow she's taking over menu development." Several cooks exchanged uncomfortable looks. Then Ethan quietly laughed. It wasn't amusement. It was disbelief. "She asked me yesterday how long risotto takes to bake." The room went completely silent. "Risotto? Bake?" Half the kitchen lowered their heads. One server whispered, "She's serious?" Ethan nodded. "Completely." For the first time since the announcement, I almost smiled. Not because anything was funny, because reality had finally entered the room. Outside, everyone believed Victoria had built the restaurant. Inside this kitchen, everyone knew she couldn't survive one dinner service. The following morning I arrived before sunrise. Habit. For 15 years, my body woke up before my alarm. I unlocked the kitchen, started checking deliveries, reviewed invoices, adjusted prep schedules. Then I stopped. What was I doing? I wasn't an owner. Apparently, I wasn't even considered important enough to introduce as the chef. I turned toward my office, or what used to be my office. The door was locked. A new nameplate had already been installed. Victoria Carter, Creative Director. Creative Director. I laughed out loud. Yesterday, she'd inherited the building. Today, she'd inherited my identity. A hostess walked toward me, looking embarrassed. "Olivia! Mr. Carter wants to see you." Dad was already sitting in his office. Victoria sat beside him scrolling through design mock-ups for new menus. Mom stood near the window smiling, as if nothing unusual had happened. Dad folded his hands. "We need to discuss your new role." New role. Not congratulations. Not thank you. A role. Victoria slid a folder across the desk. "We reorganized the company." I opened it. Every executive position had changed. General Manager, Operations Director, Marketing Director, Creative Director. Then I found my name. Kitchen Supervisor. Not Executive Chef. Not Culinary Director. Kitchen Supervisor. The salary increase they proudly highlighted was barely enough to cover inflation. I looked at Dad. "This is a joke." He sighed dramatically. "Don't make this emotional." Emotional? After 15 years. Victoria leaned forward. "This is actually a promotion." I stared at her. She continued speaking with complete confidence. "You've always been happiest behind the scenes." Mom nodded immediately. "And this way you'll have less pressure." Less pressure. They had stolen my future, and were presenting it as self-care. Dad pushed another document toward me. "We also need you to sign this." I didn't touch it. "What is it?" "Just updated employment paperwork." I started reading. Halfway through the first page, my stomach tightened. Every recipe I developed, every menu, every cooking process, every future creation, would automatically become company property. Forever. Even if I left. I slowly looked up. You want me to sign away everything I'll ever create? Dad smiled patiently. It's just standard legal language. No, it isn't. Victoria crossed her arms. You're overthinking this. No. I'm finally reading. The room became quiet. Dad's smile disappeared. Olivia, don't create problems where none exist. I closed the folder. I'm not signing. For the first time, my father didn't look disappointed. He looked irritated. A small change, but an important one. Power had shifted, just enough for him to notice. That afternoon, Harold invited me for coffee. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't offer sympathy. Instead, he placed a blank napkin on the table. Draw your kitchen. I frowned. What? The kitchen you'd build if nobody could tell you no. I hesitated, then grabbed the pen. 5 minutes passed. 10. 20. Without realizing it, I had filled both sides of the napkin. Open fire stations, chef's counter, seasonal tasting room, private garden, fermentation lab, an entirely different concept. Harold looked at the sketches, then at me. Interesting. What? You never drew their restaurant. I blinked. You drew yours. That sentence echoed in my mind long after we left the cafe. Maybe, for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't mourning what I'd lost. Maybe I had finally started seeing what I could build without them. But before I could decide what came next, my phone vibrated. It was Ethan. His voice sounded nervous. Chef, you need to come here. What happened? There was a long pause. Then he whispered something that instantly made my blood run cold. Victoria just fired 3 people because they refused to call her the creator of your menu. I didn't answer Ethan. I was already grabbing my keys. The drive back to the restaurant felt longer than it had ever been, even though it was less than 15 minutes away. My mind kept replaying his last sentence. She fired them because they wouldn't lie, not because they stole, not because they were incompetent, not because business was struggling, because they refused to erase me. When I arrived, 3 familiar faces were standing outside with cardboard boxes in their hands. Ethan, Maria, our pastry chef, Luis, the sous chef who had worked beside me for almost 8 years. None of them looked angry. They looked betrayed. Maria tried to smile when she saw me. It wasn't your fault. That somehow made it worse. What happened? Luis let out a bitter laugh. Victoria called everyone into the dining room. He looked toward the restaurant. She said the restaurant needed a fresh culture. Ethan finished the sentence for him. A culture where everyone respected her as the culinary visionary. I almost couldn't believe those words had actually come out of my sister's mouth. Maria opened the envelope she had been carrying. She made us sign a statement. She handed me the paper. At the top was the restaurant logo. Below it, 1 sentence. I acknowledged that all recipes, menu concepts, and culinary innovations were created under the direction of Victoria Carter. I read it twice, then a 3rd time. My hands slowly tightened around the page. Did anyone sign? Luis shook his head immediately. No. Maria looked down. Neither did I. Ethan smiled proudly. We'd rather lose our jobs than lie. For a moment, none of us spoke. I had spent years believing I was alone inside that kitchen. I wasn't. These people had seen every early morning, every double shift, every failed recipe I refused to give up on until it became perfect. They hadn't forgotten. My own family had. Before I could say anything else, the restaurant's front door opened. Victoria walked outside. Designer heels, perfect makeup, expensive sunglasses, as if she were stepping onto a movie set instead of firing the people who had built her business. She stopped the moment she saw me. Oh, I wasn't expecting you. I folded the paper and held it up. What is this? She barely glanced at it. Company policy. No, it's fraud. She laughed. Can you prove that? The confidence in her voice shocked me. Not because she believed she was right, because she genuinely believed no one would ever challenge her. She stepped closer. You know what your biggest problem has always been. I stayed silent. You confuse talent with ownership. She smiled. You made recipes. Dad built a business. I turned it into a brand. Her words landed like knives because they echoed everything my parents had spent years teaching her. People create. She takes credit. Then she calls it leadership. Behind the front windows, customers were beginning to arrive for lunch. Victoria noticed them. Immediately, her entire personality changed. She smiled warmly, placed one gentle hand on my shoulder. If you're done causing a scene, I'd really appreciate it if you left. The customers smiled politely as they walked inside. To them, she looked compassionate. I looked unstable. It was calculated, every second of it. I gently removed her hand. I'm leaving. Relief flashed across her face. Then I added, but one day, you're going to realize recipes aren't the business. She frowned. What does that even mean? I looked past her, into the dining room. The people who believe in them are. For the first time, her smile weakened. Only slightly. But I saw it. So did Ethan. That evening my phone wouldn't stop ringing. One call after another. Former employees, suppliers, even 2 regular customers somehow found my number. They all asked different questions. But every conversation ended the same way. Are you really gone? One elderly couple had been eating at the restaurant almost every Friday since we opened. The husband sounded heartbroken. My wife cried today. I swallowed hard. Why? She ordered the mushroom ravioli. It tasted different. I closed my eyes. That dish had taken me almost 7 months to perfect. Every measurement lived in my memory, not on paper. He hesitated before asking quietly, Did you leave because of Victoria? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He understood. Over the next 2 weeks, the calls multiplied. A seafood supplier informed me that Victoria had rejected his entire shipment because she thought fresh fish smelled too strong. A baker laughed while telling me she had replaced handmade bread with frozen rolls because customers can't tell the difference. One bartender confessed she had removed several slow-selling wines, without realizing they were the bottles food critics always praised. Every decision saved money. Every decision destroyed quality. Slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, the restaurant still looked beautiful. The food no longer told the same story. Then something happened that no one in my family expected. One Friday afternoon, Harold called me. I want you to meet someone. He refused to explain anything else. When I arrived, he was sitting inside a small private dining room with a man I had never met. Mid-50s. Simple suit. No expensive watch. No entourage. Just a notebook full of handwritten pages. Harold stood. Olivia. This is Daniel Brooks. Daniel smiled politely. I've heard about you for years. I frowned. I'm sorry, have we met? He shook his head. No, but I've eaten your food. Then he opened his notebook. Every page contained handwritten notes, dates, scores, sketches of dishes, comments about flavor, presentation, technique. He had documented almost every meal he'd eaten at the restaurant over the last 6 years. I never came because of the owners. He looked directly at me. I came because every plate told me someone extraordinary was hiding in that kitchen. A lump formed in my throat. No television interview had ever made me feel that scene. No award, no article. Just one stranger, who had quietly noticed everything. Then Daniel asked a question that completely changed the direction of my future. If you had unlimited creative freedom, what restaurant would you build? Before I could answer, my phone vibrated. It was Ethan again. His voice sounded almost panicked. Chef, you need to see this. What happened now? There was silence. Then he whispered, Victoria just announced your signature tasting menu as her own original collection. And tomorrow, one of the biggest food critics in the country is coming to review it. I stared at my phone for several seconds after Ethan hung up. Victoria wasn't just stealing my recipes anymore. She was putting herself in front of the most respected food critic in the country, using dishes she didn't know how to cook. Daniel watched my expression carefully. Bad news. I slowly nodded. My sister is about to present my tasting menu as her own. Harold remained unusually calm. What are you going to do? I already knew what everyone expected me to say. Call the newspaper. Expose Victoria. Walk into the restaurant. Start a public fight. 15 years earlier. That's exactly what I would have done. Instead, I surprised myself. I'm doing nothing. Daniel looked confused. You'll let her get away with it? I looked directly at him. No. I'm going to let her cook. For the first time that afternoon. Harold smiled. A small smile. Barely noticeable. But it told me everything. He had been waiting for that answer. The following evening, every table inside the restaurant was reserved. The critic, Graham Foster, had arrived 30 minutes early. His reviews could make restaurants famous, or destroy them in a single article. My father treated him like royalty. Champagne, private table, personal attention. Victoria stood proudly beside the kitchen doors, wearing a spotless white chef's jacket, one she had never earned. The photographers loved it. She posed confidently. She even held a chef's knife for one picture. Unfortunately, she held it backwards. One of the photographers quietly corrected her. She laughed it off. Nobody seemed concerned. Inside the kitchen, everyone was terrified. Ethan later told me exactly what happened. The moment service began, Victoria realized something she had never considered. Recipes aren't instructions. They're experience. She kept asking questions. Why isn't the sauce thickening? Why does this taste different? How long does this stay in the oven? Nobody answered. Not because they wanted revenge. Because she had fired the people who knew those answers. The replacement staff had only been there 4 days. They followed printed recipes. They didn't understand them. Within 20 minutes, tickets started backing up. Steaks came back overcooked. Fish arrived cold. Sauces separated. Desserts collapsed. The tasting menu, the menu I had spent years refining, fell apart course after course. When Graham Foster finally requested to meet the chef, Victoria walked into the dining room smiling. She extended her hand confidently. I hope you enjoyed the experience. He didn't shake it. Instead, he quietly closed his notebook. I have one question. Victoria smiled. Of course. He looked directly into her eyes. Who designed this menu? She answered without hesitation. I did. Silence. Then he asked something completely unexpected. What inspired the smoked fennel reduction in course 3? Victoria blinked. The balance of flavors. He waited. She kept talking, without actually saying anything. The room became painfully quiet. Then Graham asked another question. Why does the menu describe French reduction techniques, but the kitchen executed an American shortcut? Victoria froze. She didn't even understand the question. My father quickly interrupted. Our chef has had a long evening. Graham looked toward the kitchen. No, I don't think I've met your chef yet. The article was published the next morning. The headline wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was disappointed. A restaurant that no longer knows its own identity. He praised the building, praised the service, praised its history, then wrote one sentence that spread through the entire local culinary community. The talent that once made this restaurant unforgettable appears to have left the kitchen. He never mentioned my name. He didn't have to. Everyone understood. Reservations dropped almost immediately. Not dramatically, just enough for people to notice. The first crack had appeared. 3 days later, my father called. 32 missed calls. 9 voice messages. I ignored everyone. Then Mom texted, "Please answer. It's important." I almost deleted it. Instead, I agreed to meet them. Not at the restaurant. At a quiet cafe. The moment they walked in, I noticed something different. Dad looked exhausted. Mom looked worried. Neither of them smiled. They sat down without ordering anything. Dad folded his hands. I think we've made some mistakes. Mistakes. Such a small word. For 15 years of stolen work. I stayed silent. He leaned forward. The review hurt us. Mom immediately added, people are overreacting. Of course. Even now, nothing was ever their fault. Finally, Dad looked at me. We need your help. There it was. Not an apology. A request. What kind of help? He cleared his throat. We need you back in the kitchen. I almost laughed. As kitchen supervisor? Neither of them answered. Dad continued. You'll keep the title for now. For now. Those 2 words told me everything. He still believed I would settle for scraps. I slowly stood. I've already made my decision. Mom looked alarmed. Olivia, don't be childish. Childish. The woman who had worked without ownership for 15 years was being called childish. I looked at both of them. You didn't lose your chef. You gave her away. Then I walked toward the exit. Behind me, Dad raised his voice for the first time. If you leave now, don't expect anything from this family ever again. I stopped, not because of the threat, because I realized something. For years, that sentence would have terrified me. Now, it sounded like freedom. Without turning around, I answered quietly. I stopped expecting anything from this family. The night you gave me a cookbook, I walked out. Neither of them followed. The next morning, Daniel called. I've spoken with my partners. I frowned. About what? About your restaurant. My what? He laughed softly. The one you drew on Harold's napkin. My heartbeat quickened. We'd like to finance it. I couldn't speak. He continued. Complete creative control. Complete ownership. No family partners. No investors telling you what to cook. No one taking credit. Everything I had dreamed about was suddenly possible. Then Daniel added one final sentence. One that made me realize this wasn't just another opportunity. It was the beginning of my revenge. There's only one condition. I want to open it. Less than 2 blocks from your parents' restaurant. I barely slept that night. Not because I was afraid. Because, for the first time in years, I was excited. I spread Harold's napkin across my kitchen table. The ink had started to fade where coffee had spilled across one corner. But every sketch was still there. The open kitchen. The chef's counter. The seasonal tasting room. The garden. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was proof that I had been dreaming for myself again. Not for my parents. Not for Victoria. For me. 3 days later, Daniel invited me to an empty building on the other side of town. From the outside, it looked forgotten. Cracked windows. Dust-covered floors. Peeling paint. It reminded me of another building I'd walked into 15 years earlier. Only this time, everything felt different. Daniel handed me a single key. This one's yours. I looked at him, confused. You haven't even signed the investment agreement. He smiled. I know. Then why give me the key? Because I want the first person to unlock this place. To be its owner. Owner. Such a simple word. Yet it carried 15 years of weight. My hands trembled as I unlocked the front door. Sunlight poured through the dusty windows. The room was empty. Completely silent. Most people would have seen an abandoned property. I saw possibility. Again. Only this time. No one could take it away from me. Over the next month, construction began. I wasn't just designing a restaurant. I was building every detail I had once been told was too ambitious. The kitchen was larger. The dining room more intimate. Guests would be able to watch every dish being prepared. Nothing hidden. Nothing fake. Exactly the opposite of the place I'd left. Daniel never questioned my decisions. If I changed a wall, he approved it. If I redesigned the kitchen overnight, he simply asked what I needed. The freedom terrified me at first. Then it became addictive. Meanwhile, the restaurant across town was quietly falling apart. Not overnight. Slowly. The worst kind of collapse. One supplier refused to renew their contract. Another demanded payment up front. 2 experienced servers resigned within the same week. The head bartender accepted another job. Then Ethan called. I think you'll want to hear this. What happened? Victoria fired another chef. Why? He corrected her during service. I closed my eyes. How many experienced cooks are left? Silence. Then, none. Without realizing it, Victoria had created the one problem money couldn't solve. Experience. She kept replacing skilled people with cheaper employees. On paper, payroll looked healthier. Inside the kitchen, chaos spread every night. Customers started posting photos online. Burnt steaks, cold pasta, collapsed soufflés, missing reservations. At first there were only a handful of complaints, then dozens, then hundreds. The comments all sounded strangely similar. Something changed. It isn't the same anymore. The magic disappeared. None of them knew why. They simply felt it. One afternoon, Harold stopped by the construction site. He quietly watched contractors install the open kitchen. After several minutes he asked, "Do you know why your parents are losing customers?" I answered immediately. "They lost quality." He shook his head. "No, they lost trust." I frowned. He continued, "People forgive one bad meal. They don't forgive realizing they've been lied to." That sentence stayed with me, because he was right. The food wasn't the only thing disappearing. The illusion was. 2 weeks later, Daniel called me into his office. "I have something you should see." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were demographic reports, reservation trends, local market studies. Then, one page highlighted in yellow. I looked up. "What is this?" "Our competitors." My stomach tightened. At the top of the page, my parents' restaurant. Revenue had dropped almost 20% in 6 weeks. Private events were being canceled. Corporate bookings had nearly stopped. I kept turning pages. Each one looked worse than the last. Daniel calmly folded his hands. "They're burning cash." I stayed silent. "They don't know it yet, but they're running out of time." That evening, my phone rang again. "Dad." I ignored it. He called again, then again. Finally, a voicemail arrived. His voice sounded completely different. Not confident, not commanding, desperate. "Olivia, I know you're upset, but people are saying you're opening another restaurant." He paused. "If that's true, please call me before you make a mistake." A mistake? I almost laughed. Building something that belonged to me was apparently the mistake. I deleted the voicemail. Construction moved faster than expected. The kitchen equipment arrived. The dining tables were installed. The sign outside finally went up. For the first time, the project looked real. One afternoon, I stood alone inside the dining room after everyone had left. I imagined the conversations, the laughter, the smell of fresh bread, the first dinner service. Then I noticed Harold watching me from the doorway. "You look different." "I am." "What changed?" I thought for a long moment, then answered honestly, "I'm not trying to prove my parents were wrong anymore." He smiled. "So what are you trying to prove?" I looked around the room. "That they never owned my future." Harold nodded once. Without another word, he left. 3 days before our opening, Daniel rushed into the restaurant holding his phone. His expression told me something had gone terribly wrong. "What happened?" He looked directly at me. "Victoria just announced a press conference." I frowned. "So?" He swallowed. "She's accusing you of stealing the restaurant's recipes, and she's demanding a court order to stop your opening." The room fell completely silent. Then Daniel added one final sentence. "And the media already believes her." The press conference started at 11 the next morning. Every local news outlet was there. Food bloggers, restaurant owners, business reporters. By the time I woke up, my phone had already exploded with messages. "Is it true? Did you steal the recipes? Are they suing you?" Daniel looked at me across the conference table. "You don't have to answer today." I slowly put my phone down. "No. If I stay silent now, they'll write my story for me." Victoria stood behind a polished wooden podium inside my parents' restaurant. She wore another pristine white chef's jacket. Again, she had never cooked a real dinner service in one. Cameras flashed as she adjusted the microphone. "My family has suffered an enormous betrayal." She even sounded emotional. "My former employee," she paused dramatically, "Olivia Carter, has stolen proprietary recipes belonging to this company." Former employee, not sister. Employee. She had erased our relationship completely. Then she held up several printed menu pages. "Our attorneys are filing for an emergency injunction. We will protect our intellectual property." The reporters immediately began writing. Questions flew across the room. When did the theft happen? Do you have proof? Will her restaurant be forced to close? Victoria answered every question confidently. Too confidently. Because she believed something that had been true her entire life. That nobody would ever challenge her version of reality. An hour later, our attorneys met. Not because I wanted to sue. Because Daniel insisted. They're trying to stop your opening. You have to respond. Boxes of old records covered the conference room. Not glamorous evidence. Real evidence. Recipe notebooks. Development journals. Supplier invoices. Photos from test kitchens. Video recordings of training sessions. Thousands of ordinary moments. Moments nobody had planned to use in court. Moments created simply because I had spent years documenting my work. The attorney opened one notebook. Every page contained dates, ingredient ratios, cooking temperatures, adjustments, failures, corrections. The first entry was 14 years old. Victoria had still been in college. Another binder contained emails between me and suppliers discussing ingredients years before she joined the business. Then came hundreds of photos, me standing in the kitchen, me testing sauces, me teaching cooks, me redesigning dishes. Not staged, not promotional, just years of work. The attorney looked up. This is overwhelming. I quietly shook my head. No, it isn't. He looked confused. They're only papers. What wins this are the people. That afternoon, Ethan called. I'm outside. When I reached the lobby, he wasn't alone. Maria stood beside him. Then Luis. Then another cook. Then another. By the end of the afternoon, 12 former employees had arrived. Nobody had been asked. Nobody had been paid. Luis spoke first. If they're calling you a thief, then they're calling us liars too. Maria nodded. We're done staying quiet. One by one, they each described the same story. How I trained them. How I'd created every menu. How Victoria rarely entered the kitchen. How my father accepted awards for work he'd never done. No rehearsed speeches. No dramatic performances. Just truth. Simple. Consistent. Impossible to fake. Word spread faster than any lawsuit ever could. Several journalists who had attended Victoria's press conference began contacting former employees. Not one. Not three. More than 20. Every interview matched. Every timeline matched. Every memory pointed in the same direction. The story quietly changed. Not Chef Steele's family recipes, but who actually built the restaurant. For the first time, people stopped listening to my parents. They started asking questions. Questions my family couldn't answer. Late that evening, Dad showed up unannounced at the construction site. He looked 10 years older. His expensive suits suddenly seemed too large for him. He waited until everyone else had gone home. I just want to talk. I crossed my arms. So talk. He looked around my unfinished dining room. You've done well. I didn't respond. After a long silence, he finally asked, How much is Daniel paying you? I almost smiled. There it was. Even now, he still believed everything had a price. I'm not his employee. He frowned. What do you mean? I own this. His eyes widened. Completely. You own it. I nodded. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Then he whispered something that revealed exactly why he'd come. You can't open. I stared at him. Why? He looked away. Because if you do, we're finished. Not, we miss you. Not, we were wrong. Not, come home. Just business. Always business. I realized, standing there, that my father had never truly seen me as his daughter. I had been an asset, a valuable one. Nothing more. He took one hesitant step closer. I'll fix this. How? I'll make you partner. I laughed. The sound echoed through the empty dining room. Partner. Now. After 15 years. After stealing everything. After trying to destroy my future. He still thought offering me a smaller piece of what was already mine was generosity. You don't understand, Dad. His shoulders stiffened. I don't want your restaurant anymore. His face fell. I built something you can never give me. He whispered. What? I looked around the room. My own name. The next morning, the biggest newspaper in the state published a new headline. It wasn't about lawsuits. It wasn't about recipes. It wasn't even about restaurants. It was about betrayal. Former employees unite behind chef accused by her own family. The article went viral. Television stations picked it up. National food magazines called. Within hours, people weren't canceling reservations at my restaurant. They were canceling theirs. Daniel walked into my office holding a tablet. "You need to see this." On the screen, our reservation system had crashed. Not because of technical problems. Because it couldn't keep up. Every table, every night, for the next 3 months. Completely booked. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Daniel laughed. "I guess people finally figured out where the real chef went." Before I could answer, my phone rang again. "Mom." I almost ignored it. Then she left a voicemail. She wasn't crying. She was screaming. "Olivia, the bank is here. They're freezing our business accounts." The line went dead. My mother's voicemail ended with a loud crash. Then silence. No goodbye. No apology. Just panic. For a long moment, I stared at my phone without moving. 15 years ago, I would have run to help them without thinking. Now, I finished reviewing tomorrow night's opening menu. Only then did I call Daniel. "Can you find out what's happening?" He made one phone call. Less than 10 minutes later, he walked back into my office. "The bank didn't freeze them because of your restaurant." I frowned. "Then why?" "They violated several loan covenants." "What does that mean?" "They promised lenders revenue projections they can no longer meet." He placed a folder on the table. "The review started it. The cancellations accelerated it. And now, their cash flow has collapsed." I slowly leaned back. "They did this to themselves." Daniel nodded. "They've been pretending nothing changed." But banks don't lend money based on pride. They lend it based on numbers. The next morning, our restaurant officially opened. I arrived before sunrise, exactly like I had done for 15 years. But everything felt different. Nobody expected me to unlock someone else's dream. This time, every light I turned on belonged to something I had built. The open kitchen slowly filled with my team. Not employees, professionals, people who had chosen to be there. Ethan adjusted the prep list before smiling at me. "You ready, chef?" I looked around. Maria was preparing desserts. Luis was checking sauces. Every station moved with quiet confidence. Not because I controlled them, because they trusted me. That realization almost brought tears to my eyes. Respect freely given felt completely different from loyalty demanded. An hour before service, Harold quietly walked into the dining room. He wasn't carrying flowers, or champagne, or a congratulatory speech. He simply looked around, then handed me the old cookbook my mother had given me. "I think this belongs here." I looked at the worn leather cover. For weeks, I'd left it inside a drawer, unable to decide whether I hated it or pitied it. Harold smiled faintly. People usually throw away reminders of pain. He gently placed it in my hands. "You turned yours into motivation." For a long moment, I simply stared at it. Then I carried it toward the entrance. Inside a small glass display case, I placed the cookbook upright. Below it, a single engraved plaque read, "The gift that taught me never to build someone else's dream again." Nothing more. Anyone who understood. Dinner service began. Within minutes, every seat was occupied. The open kitchen buzzed with energy. Guests watched every plate being finished. Questions filled the room. Laughter followed. For the first time in my career, customers weren't asking where the owner was. They were already looking at her. Several recognized me from the newspaper. One elderly couple approached before dessert. I recognized them immediately. Friday nights, mushroom ravioli. They had been coming to my parents' restaurant for years. The woman smiled as tears filled her eyes. "I knew we'd find you." She squeezed my hands. "We've been looking for this flavor. Not this restaurant. Not this building. This flavor. The one thing nobody had ever been able to steal." Halfway through service, Daniel quietly approached. "You have visitors." I stepped toward the entrance, then stopped. My parents were standing outside. Richard, Elaine, Victoria. None of them looked like the people who had stood on that stage 2 months earlier. Dad's suit was wrinkled. Mom's makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion beneath her eyes. Victoria looked furious. Even now, she hadn't learned anything. The hostess looked at me. "Do you want me to ask them to leave?" I thought about it, then shook my head. "No. I'll speak to them. Outside. Not inside." I walked through the front doors. Behind me, my restaurant continued serving dinner. Nobody stopped working. Nobody panicked. Life moved on. Exactly as it should. Dad spoke first. "The bank is taking the restaurant." His voice barely resembled the man who had once controlled every room he entered. I stayed silent. Mom stepped closer. "They're forcing a sale." Victoria interrupted immediately. "You can stop this." I looked at her. "How? You buy it." I almost laughed. She wasn't asking me to save the family. She was asking me to save her lifestyle. Dad swallowed hard. "If you purchase the building, we can all work together again." Together. That word. Again. After everything. I looked at each of them, one by one. My mother, who had placed a cookbook in my hands while giving my dream away. My father, who had spent 15 years convincing me ownership could wait. My sister, who had stolen my name, my recipes, my career, and then tried to destroy my future. None of them looked sorry. They looked desperate. There was a difference. A huge one. Dad took another step forward. "We know we made mistakes." That word again. Mistakes. As if humiliation could be measured like accounting errors. I quietly asked, "Do you know what my biggest mistake was?" None of them answered. I believed family meant I didn't need my name on anything. Silence. My recipes. My work. My future. I trusted all of you with everything. Mom finally started crying. "We're still your family." I looked directly into her eyes. "No. You were my family. Then you made me your employee." No one spoke. Not even Victoria. Dad reached into his jacket. He pulled out a thick envelope. "The bank gave us one last chance." He held it toward me. "If someone purchases the property before foreclosure, the restaurant survives." I didn't touch it. For 15 years, I had imagined owning that building. Now, standing only a few feet away from everything I'd once wanted, I felt absolutely nothing. Because somewhere along the way, my dream had changed. The building had never been the dream. Being respected was. Owning my own future was. And I already had both. I gently pushed the envelope back toward my father. "I hope someone buys it." Hope immediately appeared in his eyes. Then I finished the sentence. "Because it won't be me." His shoulders collapsed. Completely. Victoria suddenly exploded. "You owe us." I looked at her. "No. You owe the person whose life you stole." She stepped toward me. "You ruined us." I shook my head. "You ruined yourselves. The day you believed talent could be replaced with favoritism." She opened her mouth again. Nothing came out. For the first time in her life, she had no one left to blame. I turned around, without another word. Behind me, I heard my mother sobbing, my father calling my name, Victoria shouting that I was selfish. None of it mattered anymore. When I walked back through the front doors, my team welcomed me exactly the way they always had. Not with applause, not with speeches, just with trust. Louise looked up from the pass. "Chef, table 12 says it's the best meal they've had in years." I smiled. "I'll thank them after service." I tied my apron, stepped back into the kitchen, and as the doors swung closed behind me, I realized something I never understood while chasing my parents' approval. They had given my sister a restaurant, but they had unknowingly given me something infinitely more valuable. The freedom to build one no one could ever take away. And that turned out to be the greatest recipe of my life.